Ever felt like you're just drowning in information? You know that feeling, right? You get up to speed on something complex, maybe for work, maybe just out of curiosity, but there's just so much stuff. Piles of articles, reports. It's overwhelming. You just want the overview, the main points, the lay of the land, without reading like 1,000 dense papers.
Oh, absolutely. We've all been there.
And, well, it turns out researchers face this exact same problem, a big one. But they've actually developed tools to handle it.
Sophisticated tools, actually.
Exactly. And today, we're doing a deep dive into one of them, the scoping review. It's a powerful method, relatively new in the evidence synthesis toolkit, they call it. And it works differently than the more traditional systematic review.
That distinction is key, definitely.
A big player here, in giving this method some structure, is the Joanna Briggs Institute, JBI. They published a really comprehensive methodology back in 2014 for how to actually do these reviews and report them.
The foundational guide, really.
And our deep dive today is based on this fascinating paper by Khalil and her team. They didn't just describe the JBI method, they went out and evaluated it. They actually asked researchers who use it, hey, how's this working for you?
Real user feedback, that's invaluable.
Totally. So we're going to unpack what these users liked, where they, hit roadblocks, and what's being done to make scoping reviews even better. Let's dig in.
Sounds great. And what's really interesting to me about scoping reviews is how they function almost like a reconnaissance mission for research.
Reconnaissance. I like that analogy.
Yeah. Before you launch a full-scale investigation or maybe test a specific intervention, you need to understand the terrain, right? Get the lay of the land.
Makes sense.
That's precisely what a scoping review does. It scopes a whole body of literature, it identifies, it analyzes, and it reports on basically all the available evidence for a given topic.
So it's about mapping things out.
Exactly. They're incredibly valuable for finding where the knowledge gaps are or clarifying concepts that might be a bit fuzzy in the literature. It's about creating that detailed map of the research landscape. What's out there? What does it look like?
Okay, that map analogy really helps clarify it. But you mentioned they're different from systematic reviews, which many of our listeners might be more familiar with. Can you break down that difference for us? Because that seems pretty critical.
Absolutely. It's a crucial distinction. And yeah, it's where some confusion can creep in. A systematic review usually tackles a very narrow, very focused question. Often it's about determining the comparative effectiveness of an intervention.
Like, does drug A work better than drug B?
Precisely. That kind of specific, often hypothesis testing question. They involve really rigorous critical appraisal. So a deep dive into the quality and bias of each included study, and often they finish with a metasynthesis using stats to combine results from multiple studies.
Okay, very focused, very rigorous appraisal.
Right. Scoping reviews, on the other hand, cast a much wider net. The questions are broader. So instead of is A better than B, it might be what types of interventions are even being used for this condition, or what are the key concepts everyone's talking about in this field?
More exploratory.
Exactly. The main goal isn't that critical appraisal or statistical combination of results. It's about understanding the characteristics of the literature itself. Who's doing the research? Where? How? They're often hypothesis generating, setting the stage for future systematic reviews, perhaps.
Ah, I see. So they often come before a systematic review might.
Often, yes. And because they don't typically require that intensive appraisal or synthesis, they can sometimes be done a bit more quickly, though there's still a major undertaking.
Right. Not exactly a weekend project. So less about proving something specific, more about exploring and charting to maybe find the hypotheses later. And the JBI, you said, provided structure for this. What are the key parts of their methodology?
Yeah. The JBI approach gives researchers a clear roadmap. It starts, logically, with focusing on a specific research area. Then you develop a well-defined research question. They use the PCC mnemonic, which is helpful.
PCC.
Participants, concept, and context. So, for example, if you're scoping medication safety, your participants might be elderly patients. The concept could be adverse drug reactions. And the context may be home care settings. It helps really define the boundaries.
Okay, participants, concept, context. Got it.
Then you need a really well-documented search strategy. How are you going to find all the relevant stuff? And finally, there's data charting and presentation, how you organize and summarize what you've found.
If people are actually using this framework across some really diverse fields, right? The source mentioned quite a few.
Oh, absolutely. It's being applied everywhere. Medication safety, like we mentioned, but also things like understanding nurse practitioner education, disaster management protocols, even exploring indigenous healthcare models.
Yeah, that's broad.
It really is. It shows how valuable this kind of mapping is when research might be scattered or just emerging. JBI provided that needed structure.
Okay, so that's the framework. Now let's get back to that Khalil study. To really see how well this GBI framework works in practice, they went straight to the researchers using it. Tell us about how they did that evaluation.
Right, so Khalil and her colleagues put together an online survey. They sent it out to 51 authors who had published scoping reviews or protocols using the JBI
Okay,
methods.
people with direct experience.
Exactly. And they got 31 responses, which is a 61% response rate. Pretty solid for this kind of survey. And importantly, it wasn't just a random sample, it was what they call a purposive sample,
Meaning,
meaning they deliberately chose authors who were deeply familiar with the JBI methodology. So the feedback wasn't from novices, it was from experienced practitioners. The survey itself covered a lot: demographics, their experience level, opinions on specific parts of the JBI manual, strengths, weaknesses, and crucially, suggestions for improvement.
that makes sense. You want feedback from people who really know the ropes. So who are these users? What kind of roles did they have?
The demographics are interesting. The majority, about 55%, identified primarily as researchers. Then came educators at about 25%,
Okay.
and most of them, around 77%, worked at universities. A smaller group were based in hospitals, so it really paints a picture of scoping reviews being heavily used within the academic and research community.
Primarily an academic tool, it sounds like. Now, thinking practically, for anyone listening who might consider doing one of these, what did this study find about the time commitment? That seems like a big question.
It definitely is a significant commitment. The study found 42% of the researchers spent between 6 and 12 months completing their scoping review.
6 to 12 months. Okay.
And get this, 32%, almost a third, took over a year.
Wow. Over a year. So even if they're generally quicker than systematic reviews, they are definitely not a quick task.
Not at all. It's a deep foundational piece of work.
So given that huge time investment, what about the payoff? Did these reviews actually lead anywhere? What kind of impact did they have?
This is where it gets really interesting, I think. The impact was substantial. A huge majority, 87%, reported that their scoping review directly led to further work.
87%. That's massive. What kind of further work?
All sorts, really. Things like developing full systematic reviews based on the gaps they identified, using the review to support grant applications, integrating it into doctoral studies, or just generally informing the direction of future research projects.
That's incredible. It really underscores that they aren't just sitting on a shelf. They're active catalysts for more research.
Absolutely. They lay the groundwork. They provide that essential map that guides the next steps in exploring a research territory. It highlights their fundamental role.
So nearly 9 out of 10 lead to more work. That's powerful. But you mentioned the time commitment. Was this work typically funded? Because that much time is a lot of resources.
Yeah, that was another striking finding. The majority, 68%, over two-thirds reported that their scoping reviews were unfunded.
Really? Unfunded?
Which really speaks to the dedication of these researchers, right? Maybe doing it as part of their regular academic duties or as exploratory work to build the case for future funding.
That does raise a big question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If this foundational work is so valuable, leading to so much more research, but it's often unfunded, are we maybe missing opportunities by not supporting these mapping exercises more directly?
It's a very valid point. Something for research institutions and funders to perhaps consider. Investing in the map might help us navigate the territory much more effectively down the line.
A really important consideration. Okay, so demanding work, often unfunded, but highly impactful. Given all that, what was the overall feeling from these users about the JBI methodology itself? Did they feel the guidance was, good enough?
Overall, yes. The reception was very positive. If you combine those who strongly agreed and those who just agreed that the guidance for each step was adequate, you get 79%.
Wow, nearly 80%. That's a strong endorsement.
It really is. It suggests that JBI has created a genuinely helpful and robust framework that researchers value. They appreciated the clarity, the systematic approach, the fact it was developed by experts. One quote captured it well: clarity, rigor, and explanation.
Clarity, rigor, and explanation. Sounds like JBI built a solid foundation, a clear roadmap.
Definitely.
But, as always, even with a great map, sometimes you find the road isn't quite as smooth as depicted, right? Real-world use always uncovers friction points. Where did users feel things could be improved? What were the challenges?
Precisely. And this is where the study gets really useful for refining the methodology. A major theme that came up repeatedly was a need for more examples. Just lacking examples in every step, as one participant put it.
More practical example,
Yeah.
okay.
This was especially highlighted for two key areas: defining the inclusion criteria, so exactly what studies get in or stay out, and for presenting the results. Users specifically asked for more guidance about inclusion criteria.
And why is that so critical?
Well, those criteria are the gatekeepers, right? They determine the entire scope and shape of your review. If the guidance isn't crystal clear, or you don't have good examples to follow, it's hard to apply them consistently. Different reviewers might make different calls.
Right, which impacts the reliability of the whole map.
Exactly. And then, once you've gathered all the information based on those criteria, users also struggled with presenting it. The comment, "the results presentation needs clarification," came up a lot.
So how best to actually show what you found?
Yeah, summarizing a potentially huge and diverse body of literature without doing that deep critical appraisal or statistical synthesis like in a systematic review is inherently challenging. Users wanted more guidance, more structure, maybe more examples of how to effectively chart and narrate those findings.
That makes sense. It's not just about finding the data, but communicating it clearly. Were there other tricky spots?
There were. About 14% felt the guidance for data extraction was inadequate. This is the process of pulling the relevant information out of each included study.
Why is that part challenging?
Well, for scoping reviews, it's often quite iterative. You might start with a template for what data you want, but as you read the studies, you realize other information is important, or your initial categories don't quite fit. It's not always linear. Levac and others found similar issues, noting it was sometimes unclear exactly what nature and extent of data to extract.
So you need flexibility, but also guidance on how to manage that flexibility systematically.
Exactly. And that same 14% also found the guidance for actually writing the final report inadequate. This kind of points to a broader challenge in the field. Because scoping reviews are flexible, there hasn't always been universal agreement on the single best way to structure the final write-up.
Any other suggestions that came up?
One practical one was about software. Some users wished the JBI's own software tools had specific templates for scoping reviews, like they do for other review types, just to streamline the process a bit.
Little things that can make a big difference in workflow.
Definitely. And stepping back, these aren't just minor quibbles, Improving guidance on inclusion criteria, data extraction, results presentation. This is all about boosting the clarity, the consistency, the reproducibility of these reviews.
Which ultimately makes them more trustworthy and useful for everyone, including you, the listener, relying on this kind of synthesis.
Precisely. It ensures these powerful mapping tools reach their full potential.
It really shows how valuable that user feedback loop is. Even expert methods get better with real-world testing. So users flag these areas: lack of examples, clarity on inclusion results, data extraction guidance. What's happening with that feedback? How is it shaping the future?
Well, the good news is that the JBI is responsive. The study explicitly states that these findings will inform future updates to their guidance. It's designed to be an evolving methodology.
That's great to hear. It's not static.
Not at all. And beyond JBI's own internal refinement, there's also a broader movement in the research community towards more standardization, particularly in reporting. The main tool here is something called the Prisma Sawyer checklist.
Prisma score. Okay, what's that stand for? Sounds important.
It does, and it is. It stands for Preferred Reporting Items for Systematic Reviews and Meta-Analyses. That's the Prisma part extension for scoping reviews. So, Prisma score.
Building on the familiar Prisma guidelines for systematic reviews.
Exactly. It was developed by Tricco and colleagues to help standardize how scoping reviews are conducted, but especially how they're reported. It provides a checklist of essential items that should be included in any published scoping review.
So it promotes consistency across different reviews, regardless of the specific methodology guide used.
That's the goal. And notably, the study mentions that the JBI approach is already quite congruent, quite aligned with the Prisma score checklist. This really points towards a healthy convergence in the field.
Collaboration, not competition, in refining methods.
Yes. It shows that drive towards a common language, a shared framework for what constitutes a high-quality, transparent scoping review. That's incredibly valuable as the methodology continues to mature. It benefits researchers conducting the reviews, and it benefits readers trying to understand and use them.
That really makes sense. Better standards, better communication, better research in the end. So for researchers thinking about starting a scoping review right now, given this evolving landscape, what's the takeaway recommendation from the Khalil study?
The authors suggest continuing to use the current JBI methodology. It's still highly valued and robust, as the feedback showed. But they advise doing so with an awareness of those limitations we discussed, maybe supplementing with extra thought around examples, inclusion criteria, and so on.
Be mindful of the potential rough spots.
Right. And they also strongly recommend looking at newly published work on methodology, especially things like the Prismus Gray checklist, to ensure the reporting is as clear and comprehensive as possible. It's about using the best available tools, but keeping an eye on the ongoing improvements.
Stay current, basically. Okay, this has been a fantastic deep dive. Let's try and quickly recap the key takeaways for you, our listener.
Good idea.
First, scoping reviews are really vital tools. They map broad research areas, helping us see the big picture, find gaps, clarify ideas. They're distinct from systematic reviews, more exploratory, hypothesis generating.
Right. Think map making versus hypothesis testing.
Second, the JBI methodology provides a highly valued, transparent, expert-developed guide for creating these maps. Users really appreciate its structure and rigor.
But third, that real-world use highlighted some clear areas for improvement, primarily a need for more concrete examples, especially for setting inclusion criteria, extracting data consistently, and presenting the diverse findings clearly.
And finally, the field isn't standing still. Methods are being refined, and tools like the Prismus SAR checklist are promoting greater standardization and transparency in how these reviews are reported.
Making the maps even better and easier to read, essentially.
Exactly. And for you, the listener, why does all this methodological detail matter? Well, understanding how research itself is done, how it's mapped, critiqued, and refined, helps you become a much more critical and informed consumer of information.
Mm-hmm. You can better appreciate the work that goes into synthesizing knowledge and evaluate the strength of the evidence you encounter.
Whether that's in your professional life, reading reports, or just trying to understand a health issue or a complex topic you see in the news, it equips you to navigate that sea of information we talked about at the start. So maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. As we all grapple with this ever-increasing flood of information, day in and day out, the question isn't just how researchers adapt their tools like scoping reviews, but how do we each of us adapt our own personal tools and methods? How do we get better at not just consuming information, but truly understanding it, critically evaluating it, and effectively using the knowledge available in this vast, expanding universe?
A challenge for all of us.
Definitely something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.